There's no time like overtime. Welcome back to another episode of Fantasy OT. Today we're going to be talking about the top 25 receivers in a 12-person league based on PPR scoring. Topping our list, this should come as no surprise, the man that just won his first Offensive Player of the Year, Justin Jefferson. Jefferson has a great chance to repeat as number one. The Vikings passed 65% of the time last year, and I think this year is going to be no different. As long as Kevin O'Connell's the coach and Kirk Cousins is his quarterback, he should continue to produce at the level he has been. The Vikings shipped off Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook, so I could actually see them relying on Jefferson a little bit more than they have. They did draft Jordan Addison in the first round, who will likely get some good playing time, but I don't think he's going to really be eating into his workload too much. They also have TJ Hawkinson and, of course, KJ Osborne, but both of them are obviously not going to impact Jefferson that much. We all know who the alpha is in the Gopher State, and that's not changing anytime soon. Over his first 3 seasons, Jefferson has averaged a ridiculous 158 targets, with every year getting a little bit better. Draft him at number 1. He's an absolute no-brainer. Up at number 2, the Cheetah. Needless to say, Tyreek Hill put all the questions about him being propped up by Patrick Mahomes to rest, finishing as a WR2 for the second time in 3 seasons last year. And the one year he didn't, he finished as the WR6. But what makes last year's WR2 finish even more impressive is the fact that he did it without Tua for 4 games. Had Tua been healthy, I seriously think he would have gone over 2,000 yards. He was literally on a torrid pace to start the season. Over the last 3 years, he's really been matchup proof, averaging 19.8 points per game. And with Jalen Waddle on the other side and teams having to respect his speed, I don't see him slowing down anytime soon. I think he could easily finish as the WR1, especially if Tua's healthy. Draft him at number 2 with confidence. Coming up at number 3, Mr. Triple Crown himself, Cooper Kupp. I feel like a lot of people are still sleeping on Kupp because of how his season ended and how much the Rams fell off last year. But I think with Stafford back in the mix, he's going to pick up right where he left off prior to the injury. Despite only playing 9 games last year, he still had the highest average in terms of points per game with 22.4. So when he's on the field, he's producing. And with Stafford back in the mix, I have no doubt he's going to get right back to business. Stafford is really locked on to Kupp the entire time he's been a Ram, and that's going to continue. I mean, all they have is Ben Skoranek and Van Jefferson behind him. So Kupp really has no competition for targets. I would imagine that Kupp will get back to getting around 11 targets a game just like he was prior to the injury. The only thing I would keep an eye on is the fact that he tweaked his hamstring recently. It doesn't sound too serious, but it's definitely something to monitor. Up at number 4, this guy I've been very high on. I even talked about him in a different video. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Like I mentioned before, he is tied with Michael Thomas and Justin Jefferson for the most receptions over the first 2 seasons of a career with 196. This guy has always been overlooked both in real life and in fantasy, and I think this is the year he starts to open some eyes. Up until now, he's averaged about 8.25 targets per game, and I can see him ending up closer to 10 this year. The Lions still have Ben Johnson calling plays. The receiving core hasn't changed too much. They got rid of DJ Chark, but they signed Marvin Jones and traded for Denzel Mims. But with Jameson Williams suspended for the first 6 games, I think the Lions are going to rely on St. Brown that much more heavily. He's currently being drafted towards the end of the second round, around the 20 spot, and I think that's a bargain for someone that could end up in the top 10 overall. Up at number 5, this may be a little controversial because obviously you haven't heard his name yet, but Jamar Chase, the former Rookie of the Year, and the guy who probably won or lost you your fantasy championship in 2021. Chase is coming off of a somewhat dismal year, and that's mostly attributed to injury. He had a hairline fracture in his hip and a torn labrum, but even when he was on the field, he was kind of boom or bust. He accumulated most of his points over 5 games and only managed to play in 12. Oddly enough, he had more receptions through those 12 games than he did throughout his entire rookie year. There's no denying Chase's big playability, but I think there's an argument that he's not even the number 1 receiver on his team. T. Higgins gets overlooked so much, and I think we need to start giving him more respect too. Nonetheless, Chase did finish as a WR11 despite playing in so few games, and Joe Burrow did have the 5th most pass attempts in the league, so there's plenty of love to go around for everyone. But you can't overlook the drops. He finished 3rd in the league with 10 drops despite only playing 12 games. I don't blame anyone for reaching for him earlier than this. He probably will finish inside the top 7, but I think there's going to be a lot more patience required with Chase than you realize. Up at number 6, Stefon Diggs. I think this might be a year of greasing the squeaky wheel. Even though they're downplaying it, I definitely think there's friction between Allen and Diggs. And I think this year, Allen is going to do what he has to keep his star receiver happy. Having said that, Diggs has never had less than 103 receptions during his time in Buffalo. And I think that trend is going to continue. Diggs does have a number of things going his way in addition to this. He's coming off of a career-high 11 touchdowns. He's been somewhat of an Iron Man, and the other two receivers are far down the depth chart. Gabe Davis just never really took that step and became a real number two. They don't know what they have in Khalil Shakir. So I think he's going to be keeping his spot atop the depth chart for a while. The Bills did draft Dalton Kincaid, who I think will make more noise than people are anticipating, but it's not going to be enough to eat into Diggs' workload. Diggs has finished inside the top 5 WR rankings in 2 of the last 3 seasons, and he could very well do it again this year. Up at number 7, CeeDee Lamb, last year's WR5 overall. And I think this was especially impressive because he had 5 games with Cooper Rush throwing him the ball. Now let's consider the fact that Dalton Schultz is gone, Ezekiel Elliott is gone, so there's a case to be made that CeeDee Lamb may be relied on even more this year. Yes, Kellen Moore is no longer with the team, but I don't see Dallas slowing down in terms of passing. I think Dak Prescott's going to pepper his number 1 playmaker as much as he can handle it. They do still have Michael Gallup, and they did sign Brandon Cooks, who will definitely get looks, but I don't think it's going to be enough to impact CD. What I like most about Lamb is the fact that he really provides a stable floor. Last year, he was 4th in the league with 156 targets, so if you're looking for someone that's a bit more secure, I think Lamb is your guy. The only thing I would say he needs to work on is his route running. There were definitely times where him and Prescott weren't on the same page, and it led to an interception, but if he can clean that up, he'll have even better numbers than last year. Up at number 8, Devonte Adams, coming off of his 3rd straight first-team All-Pro bid. He also put questions to rest around his ability to carry a team. I think last year he proved that his success and Green Bay's success was not only attributed to Aaron Rodgers. He had just as much of a hand in that. What makes last year's finish even more impressive is the fact that he did it with Derek Carr and Jared Stidham throwing him the ball. Last year, Adams proved to be one of the biggest steals on draft day, and I think that might be the case again this year. We're talking about a guy that hasn't finished lower than the WR3 in the last 3 years. I mean, if he's able to overcome this leg injury he suffered recently, and it doesn't sound too serious from what they're saying, then I don't see why his production won't continue to be where it's been. He was 2nd in the league with 180 targets, trailing only Justin Jefferson by 4. He has a more stable quarterback situation, hopefully, in Jimmy Garoppolo. So I think the stars are lining up for him to have another great year. Darren Waller's no longer on the team. If Josh Jacobs gets secured and they're able to bring him in, that's only going to help his case because defenses are going to have to key in on him. We're talking about the former rushing leader. The 2 things to kind of keep in mind as well is the fact that the Raiders have the 2nd hardest schedule and they also signed Jacoby Myers, but I really don't see either of those things impacting his production. Up at number 9, Philadelphia's Batman. It's crazy to think that Philadelphia had 2 receivers finish inside the top 10. Last year, Brown had career numbers across the board, and Jalen Hurts proved that he's a legitimate quarterback producing 2,000-yard receivers. Brown had 145 targets, averaged 17.6 PPR points per game, and averaged 17 yards a catch, good for 3rd best in the league. He really proved how dominant he can be. He definitely has the talent to be higher than this, but I think with Smith on the other side and Philadelphia focused on running, it's going to make it difficult for him to do it. But I don't want to sell him short. From weeks 13 through 18, he was a WR1. So, I mean, if he's able to string together performances like that throughout the season, who knows what the ceiling is for him. Up at number 10, last year's Offensive Rookie of the Year, Garrett Wilson. I think if Breece Hall didn't get hurt, we can all agree that he would have won the award. But it's nuts to think that the Jets hit on both the Offensive Rookie of the Year and the Defensive Rookie of the Year. What I think makes Wilson's win a little more impressive is the fact that he had Joe Flacco, Mike White, and Zach Wilson under center. I can't imagine what he's going to do with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. Wilson ended up finishing as a WR21. I can definitely see him improving on this. And he also had the 7th most red zone targets with 19. I don't see Allen Lazard or Corey Davis eating into this number very much. And he should be poised for potentially an even bigger breakout season. He should definitely score more than the 4 touchdowns he had last year. And I think he's a solid 2nd-round pick. Up at number 11, Jalen Waddle. This man managed to double his average yards per catch from his rookie season, finishing the year with a league-high 18.1 yards per catch. He definitely proved that he can coexist with Tyreek Hill, and he was able to finish as a WR8. The only thing that left me a little bit concerned is that we saw a pretty steep drop-off in the number of receptions that he had from his rookie season, and he was really reliant on the deep ball. There are a couple of other concerns for me with Waddle. He's been really reliant on his connection with Tua. In the 8 games where he didn't have Tua, he has not scored a touchdown and has seen a steep drop-off in production, averaging only 10.8 yards per catch. So if Tua misses any time, that's going to leave us in some trouble. The other thing is he apparently suffered a midsection injury recently. McDaniel said it's not too serious, but obviously you can't tell until the season starts. Hopefully he's okay and he can get back to doing what he was doing last year. Up at number 12, I've already kind of talked about how much I like this guy, T. Higgins. I think he's really one of the most overlooked superstar receivers in the league. How he hasn't gotten a Pro Bowl bid or even a second-team All-Pro bid is beyond me. I think a big reason why he doesn't get the love and respect that Jamar Chase does is because Chase has that history with Joe Burrow and was really touted coming out of college. But Higgins has held his own since being in the league. We're talking about a guy that's averaged 109 receptions per year, over 1,000 yards every year, and over 6 touchdowns per year. That is really, really impressive considering he's only had a little bit more than a 20% target share. But like I mentioned before when I was talking about Chase, Burrow had the 5th highest passing attempts in the league, so all mouths should be fed. Coming in at number 13, Chris Olave. No Michael Thomas? No problem. No Jameis Winston? No problem. Chris Olave does what apparently all Ohio State receivers do, hit the ground running. In his rookie season, he went over 1,000 yards and had 4 touchdowns and was able to average 14.5 yards per catch, good for 12th in the league. And let's not forget, he did most of this with Andy Dalton. With Derek Carr being a big upgrade, I think he's definitely going to build on his rookie year. The only things I'd keep in mind with Olave is the fact that he missed a game due to a hamstring injury last year, and he also had some issues with a concussion. So there's definitely some injury risk built in. But I think undoubtedly he's the new X receiver for New Orleans. I know Michael Thomas is now back, but we've all kind of seen how that's gone the last 3 years, so we're not going to hold our breath. I think Olave's role is safe, and he should also have the added benefit of Alvin Kamara being suspended for the first 3 games. Up at number 14, the Robin to A.J. Brown's Batman, Devonte Smith. Devonte Smith managed to finish as a WR9. This is especially impressive considering he put up a bagel week 1. While he did start the season slow, he definitely kicked up the burners as the season went on. He was the WR4 from weeks 13 through 18. It was also really nice to see him take a big jump in terms of total receptions. He went from 64 to 95 last year, and I think this year he'll probably end up around that same 95 spot. Maybe a little bit more, but it just depends how pass happy Philadelphia's offense is. I think as long as he has Jalen Hurts throwing him the ball and A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert taking away attention, he should provide a pretty stable floor. Right now he's going in the 3rd round, and that's a solid place for him. Up at number 15, Keenan Allen. 2022 was kind of a difficult year for Keenan Allen. He battled a hamstring injury, causing him to miss a number of games, but when he was on the field, he reminded us why he is one of the best receivers in the league. From weeks 11 through 18, he was the WR3 overall, and over the last 6 seasons, he's averaged 6.5 receptions per game and 6 touchdowns per season. Very impressive and very consistent. And during that time span, he's never finished lower than the WR13. I know he's getting a bit older, but I still think he has plenty left in the tank. The few things to keep in mind, though, are the fact that the Chargers drafted Quentin Johnston in the 1st round, they still have Mike Williams, and they do have Austin Eckler, who is arguably the league's best pass-catching running back. So that's going to eat into his target share. Even if he does have a slight dip in production, I don't think it's going to be notable enough. I mean, we're talking about Justin Herbert throwing him the ball, the man who had the 2nd most passing attempts in the league last year. If Allen is able to stay healthy, I think a top 15 finish is in sight. And I think you might even be able to get him at a discount because of that hamstring injury last year and nab him in the 4th round. Up at number 16, DK Metcalf. Metcalf had the 2nd most red zone targets in the league last year with 27. Trailing Justin Jefferson by 1. And he also managed to play all 17 games, which is especially impressive because he had a patellar injury in the middle of the season. Not only that, he also had a career-best 90 receptions. I don't even know how he was walking, let alone jumping over DBs to make plays the way he was. The Seahawks drafted Jackson Smith-Njigba, which I think shows their commitment to both Geno Smith and to the passing game. So I think there's little doubt that Metcalf's going to continue to get the ball the way he was last year. Coming in at number 17, Amari Cooper. While Cooper did have the 2nd most drops in the league with 11, he quietly had one of his best seasons as a pro. He finished the year with a career-high 9 touchdowns and had his 2nd highest yardage total. And this is all with Jacoby Brissett and a very rusty Deshaun Watson throwing him the ball. He's still the unquestioned number 1 receiver in Cleveland, with only a newly signed Elijah Moore and David Njoku behind him. He finished the year as a WR10, and I think it's very possible he ends up right there again this year. Up at number 18, a guy who I think is a great value, Calvin Ridley. Ridley has a new home, coming off of a year-long suspension. I think Atlanta gave up on him way too quick, but I think he's ready to hit the ground running. He's in a great situation with an ascending Trevor Lawrence. Marvin Jones is no longer on the team, leaving 81 targets behind, which should almost all go to Calvin Ridley. Ridley seems to be running at a different speed than everybody else on the field. I saw footage of him and Zay Jones running routes, and there really was no comparison. Even though he missed a year, I think Ridley's still very much in the prime of his career. And we're talking about a guy that finished as the WR5 in 2020. So if you're able to get him in the 5th round, he may prove to be one of the biggest deals of the draft. I think it only helps his case that Evan Ingram, Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk are there to take attention away from him, and even Travis Etienne. I think he's shown when he was in Atlanta, he was actually better fit to be the second guy when Julio Jones was the alpha. And with so much attention being spread out from defenses, I think Ridley's really going to remind everyone why he was one of the league's most elite receivers before being suspended. Up at number 19, DeAndre Hopkins. Aside from his rookie year, Hopkins has been inside of the top 10 in terms of major receiving categories throughout his career. We're talking about targets per game, receptions per game, and yards per game. And even though he played 9 games last year, he still was the top 10 in those categories over that time span. Even though he's in Tennessee now, I expect that trend to continue, and I expect him to lead the Titans in almost every major receiving category, despite having Treylon Burks. For his career, he's averaged about 9.5 targets per game, and I think with Derrick Henry taking away attention, the aforementioned Burks taking away attention, and even Chigaquanquo, I think Hopkins is going to continue to show everybody why he's one of the most elite receivers. We've all seen his catch radius. I mean, he may have the widest and best catch radius in the league. You don't even need that much separations when you have hands as good as he does. I mean, you literally can just put it in the vicinity and he will go up and get it. We've seen him do it time and time again. He's definitely the alpha on the Titans, and I think he's going to have another strong finish to this year. He's currently being drafted on the 51 spot, which I think is really undervalued. I think if you can get him there, that's a great price. Up at number 20, Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel was really hard to assess this year. I mean, 2 years ago, he was a first-team All-Pro, seemed like literally one of the best receivers in the league and one of the best running backs. And last year, he was often injured with a high ankle sprain and sluggish, to be honest. And I think, respect to him for recognizing the fact that he was a bit sluggish coming into the year. And it seems like he's taken the steps to make sure he's in game shape and mentally prepared for this year. But I really just don't know what to expect with him. I honestly think it was all the drama around his contract extension that affected him last year. But with that and the high ankle sprain behind him, I think he'll get back to producing the way he was prior to the injury this year. Don't get me wrong, I think he'll definitely have a very prominent role in Kyle Shanahan's offense, but let's not overlook the fact that Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, and Brandon Ayuk are going to eat into his touches. So just keep that in mind if you do draft him. Also, he had 9 drops in only 13 games last year, which is something I hope he cleans up. Up at 21, Scary Terry McLaurin. Another year, another quarterback carousel for Washington. But once again, McLaurin proved that he is quarterback proof. And now it's Sam Howell's turn. What's promising is that in that one game that he and Howell did play together, Howell gave him a 33% target share. Last year, he finished as a WR14. And I think right now he's being taken around the WR23 spot. So if you do get him around there, that's obviously a great value. Strangely enough, over the last 2 seasons, he's had exactly 77 receptions and 5 touchdowns. But I think with Eric Bieniemy in the mix, he should be able to improve on both of those numbers. He'll likely settle in as a high-end WR2 with weekly WR1 upside, depending on the matchup. Coming in at number 22, DJ Moore. I think if you can be successful with PJ Walker, Baker Mayfield, and Sam Darnold, you can definitely be successful with Justin Fields. Needless to say, Moore is very familiar being in bad situations, and I think Chicago's no different. Yet somehow, in 3 of his 5 seasons in Carolina, he managed to go over 1,100 yards. And I think he's going to add another one to his resume this year in Chicago. The Bears were desperate for a number 1 receiver. They really want to get Justin Fields going as a passer. And I don't think Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, or Cole Kmet were cutting it. Moore is a true number 1 receiver who should step into that alpha role almost immediately. Aside from his rookie year, Moore has never finished outside of the top 25 in terms of receiver ranking, and I think he could very well crack the top 20 this year. It really helps that the Bears have a soft schedule, and I think if you can get him at his current ADP of around 55, that's a steal. Up at number 23, the man that was either really cold or really hot last year, Christian Watson. Watson dropped his first career target and what would have likely been his easiest touchdown as a pro. But he did get his footing, and from weeks 10 through 13, he was the WR3 overall, where he averaged 24.8 points a game. And I think with Aaron Rodgers out of town, it's only going to help his case. It kind of seemed that Rodgers' lack of empathy at times affected the young receiver's confidence. And I think him and Jordan Love are going to have a pretty strong connection. If he can stay healthy, I really think him and Romeo Doubs are due for breakout seasons. Coming in at number 24, Drake London. Drake London was one of the highest touted receivers coming out of college. To say he fell short of expectations last year would kind of be an understatement, but I don't think it's all his fault. He suffered from bad quarterback play and from being in an offense that was very run heavy. Atlanta ran the ball 55% of the time, but once Desmond Ridder got inserted, things started to look up. He ended up averaging 9 targets per game over the last 4 games, and I think he's going to build off of that momentum this year with Ridder now being the full-time starter. Despite having all these things against him, he still managed to put up a solid 117 targets. I think this year he could very well end up closer to 150. Atlanta also drafted Bijan Robinson and they get Kyle Pitts back, both of whom should take defensive attention away from London. So I think London is going to pick up where he left off and make up for last year. I would definitely expect London to score more than the 4 touchdowns he did last year, and he should definitely end up inside of the top 25 and could possibly have a top 20 finish. Up at number 25, Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk has gotten better every year he's been in the league, and I think this year is going to be no different. Last year, he had his first 1,000-yard season, and I have no doubt he's going to do it again this year. Word out of training camp is that Ayuk has been the best player on either side of the ball. This is especially impressive considering he's going against arguably the league's best defense. Even though the Niners run a run-heavy scheme, Ayuk is still their best true receiver. Samuel's more of a wide back. Yes, they have George Kittle, but I don't think anybody has the ball skills that Ayuk does. 2 other things that I really love about this situation are his durability and his snap share. Over the last 2 seasons, he's had an 83 and 91% snap share respectively, so he's on the field constantly, and he also has a quarterback now that knows how to throw him open in Brock Purdy. So I can really see him taking that next step. He's currently being drafted around the 6-7 turn, and I think that's a great spot for someone that will likely end up inside of the top 25. Those are my rankings for the top 25 receivers this year. Please subscribe and leave your thoughts on who you think should be inside this list in the comments below.